Recession already underway, markets still asleep, Rosenberg warns. So the US economy is already in recession, even if markets have yet to wake up to it, says David Rosenberg, founder and chief economist at Rosenberg Research. In a new interview with Kitco News, Rosenberg points to a wide set of deteriorating indicators, including the Federal Reserve's own Beige Book, to argue that economic retraction is not coming. It's already here. So I thought about this story, and I have been told that the Federal Reserve has about approximately 400 economists working at the Federal Reserve. Well, it seems to me they can't seem to add up 2 and 2, let alone be an economist. But what's your thoughts? Is it because it's just all Keynesian top thinking? Is it that people don't understand that we have no growth? What's your thoughts, Alistair?
Well, first of all, about whether there is growth or not. I think that the US is in recession, and I would agree with Rosenberg on that point. The reason I believe this is that if you take out the element of GDP, which is purely down to the budget deficit, because the budget deficit is spent into the economy. Therefore, if you strip that out, you then end up with an economy, if you like, being measured without the inflation of a budget deficit. Now, under those circumstances, you can see that with the budget deficit in America currently running at 6.5% to 7.5% GDP, take that out, and yes, I mean the economy minus that is in recession, and has been for 2 or 3 years now. The other factor, and this is why it's macroeconomics is really rubbish. Let's put it as bluntly as that. Another factor is that you cannot measure the general level of prices. I mean, we can all have an opinion as to what the general level of prices might be, but you cannot measure it because one person's spending is completely different from another person's spending. You can't average it out. And of course, we are also all aware that because the governments produce the statistics, and because that they do things like hedonics and so on and so forth, they manage to suppress the headline rate of inflation, as they call it. I mean, we have independent analysts who have shown that the current rate of price inflation in America is perhaps closer to 10% than the 2.5% to 3%, which is reported by government statistics. And it's been like that for decades. So, I mean, this is where, if you really want to get an approximation of the loss of purchasing power of a currency, look at the relationship between the currency and gold. That is why gold is where it is, it measured in dollars. It is actually a truer reflection of what's going on. But coming back to the point, if you try and calculate what the real growth in the economy, as it were, the real growth in GDP, you should also take out the debasement of the currency. And if the debasement of the currency is considerably more than the government tells us, then obviously that has an impact on so-called growth of GDP. So all these figures are actually pretty much meaningless. But interestingly, the University of Michigan's consumer survey, which covers quite a few areas of consumer demand and all the rest of it, indicates that the recent instability with respect to tariffs and President Trump's sort of vacillations, saying one thing and then something completely different on the following day, this has led to a loss of confidence amongst consumers. This, I would assume, would be beginning to be reflected in government statistics over, let us say, the coming months, but probably not as much as they should be, because you're talking about GDP, you're talking about nominal GDP, which is being undermined in terms of its purchasing power by, guess what? The government budget deficit running at 6.5% to 7.5% every fiscal year. So this is, I think, is a classic example of where suddenly we're going to find things sort of happen, and we sort of think, well, we should have known this. But the point is, the statistics which the government produces, upon which everybody appears to rely, are themselves fatally flawed. And I always go back to something that Lord Canning, who was Prime Minister in this country in 1827, said, "I can prove anything with statistics except the truth." And this was before we had all these statistics churned out by government computers.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that one up, because I was trying to remember exactly that particular quote.
But I mean, the answer is that yes, we are. I think we are in recession, as he puts it. I think probably going into a slump is it's the old-fashioned description, if you like, of the conditions that we have. And you only need to go around the country and see the state of high streets, the small and medium-sized businesses, which in this country employ something like well over 90% they provide something like over 90% of jobs in the UK, and it's not too dissimilar in America. And you've got these consumers, as it were, who are getting maxed out on the credit cards. So the whole situation is really grinding to some sort of halt. And I think that's extremely worrying. And I think really to just think in terms of, the economy is likely to grow at 0.7% or whatever, come on, this is not a real figure. It really isn't. You've got to look at it, I think, as the Austrian economists would say, from an a priori basis. In other words, you've got to argue the thing through rather than just depend on the poll statistics, which we know don't present the real situation.
So there we have, folks, the world at war, and but also the facts and figures have been distorted to look like they're telling the truth, but it's exactly the opposite.